This is the first time this quarter, I think, that we've had a presentation in the class by one of the people who is taking the class. I got to know Mary Lou Chenoweth last quarter when she enrolled in the class on the Vietnam War. And you have seen her. She usually sits up in front, and she's in her wheelchair. And she is going to talk about the way she views life from that position, from what has happened to her. And this is a very, very special time for all of us because she hasn't done this before. She has given brief talks, I understand, to various groups, but nothing to this many people, nothing quite as public about who she is, the reason for the wheelchair, how she looks at life now, how she interprets life. So that's why we have the video, Jerry, because we want to keep a record of this. This is a very, very special event. She's a very special person. Can I ask you to welcome somebody who's already a member of the class? Let's do it strongly, warmly. This is Mary Lou Chenoweth. No, let's see.
Can you hear me now? Yes. First of all, I'd like to make a correction. My name is Louanne. It's Mary Louanne, but I go by Louanne. And I want to thank Professor Capps for inviting me here this morning to speak to all of you and my fellow students. And a special thanks to my friends that have come to support me this morning. Once upon a time, I was an able-bodied person, just like yourselves. And I loved to run and jump. And I liked to ride my bike. And I learned to water ski when I was 6 years old. I loved to ride my pony. I would ride for hours and hours and be at one with nature and myself. My family used to take a lot of vacations, and we'd go to Florida a couple of times a year. And I would always go during Christmas and come back and see my friends, and I had a nice tan, and I was the envy of all my friends. We did a lot of camping, so I got to do a lot of hiking. My father always made good money, so as children we never had any wants. Maybe we were even a little spoiled. We always went to church. We were Methodist, and my mother was a choir director, so I was naturally in the choir. We were always very active and popular in the community. I was basically a middle-class, Midwestern, Methodist Hoosier. And for those of you who don't know what Hoosier means, that's someone from Indiana. I'm the oldest of 4 children, and my family, we moved several times because of my father's work. During my freshman year, I was cheerleader at the school that I attended, and during that year I was pom-pom girl, so I was in band. And my sophomore year I became secretary of student council, and I'd even won the Presidential Physical Fitness Award from my school. I was also a queen candidate for homecoming that year. But like most teenagers, I became rebellious and started testing my parents' authority. I started hanging around an older crowd, and I learned to smoke cigarettes, and everyone was always drinking, and I became sexually active with a boy who was 4 years older than myself. After my sophomore year, I became pregnant. And at 16 years old, I got married. At 17 years old, my son was born. I was overjoyed. I loved being a mother. At 18 years old, I became disillusioned with life. I felt that I had wasted my youth and that I had lost my friends that I had in school. We didn't have anything in common anymore, and I had succumbed to peer pressure. At 18, I decided that the marriage wasn't working out, and so I had filed for divorce. I tried to move back home, but I was still very rebellious, and it didn't work out so well. Moving back home after you've been on your own was real hard. And so I was going to move out and move in with a girlfriend. My mother remembers the last time that she ever saw me walking, she said, I flipped my hair back and said, I don't need you. I don't need anybody. I was on a downward spiral to a self-made hell. I was confused, I was angry, and I was very selfish. But I was determined to find my own way in the world. And so my mother, she didn't have a choice but to let me go. I moved in that night with a girlfriend named Debbie Hicks, and I had a double date with a boy named Jim Beams from Rochdale. True story. We stopped at a liquor store and bought some liquor, vodka and orange juice, and we're going to make screwdrivers. I think we had peach brandy and Coke. And we stopped at a apartment and we mixed the drinks, and we tried to get in one bar, and since us girls were underage, we couldn't get in. So we went to another bar 45 minutes away at another town. On this trip to this other town, I consumed a lot of alcohol, and I wasn't a big drinker, so it didn't take much. We went into the bar, and they had ordered a couple of drinks, and I took 2 sips, and I was in the bathroom throwing up. I was very, very sick. I probably had alcohol poisoning by this time. I told them that I wanted to go home, so reluctantly, they decided to go home. We were on a country road in the middle of I don't know where, and we were traveling to where I lived. It took about 45 minutes. That's what the trip would have normally taken. This was the first time I'd ever been in a bar. The driver, Jim Beams, started driving really fast and really crazy. And this was in February. In Indiana in February, the roads were very slick and frosty, and it was around midnight. Somewhere on a country road, everything seemed like Twilight Zone. It just seemed very surreal. We went across an iron bridge, and I remember seeing the frost and the white on the iron bridge, and an animal was scurrying on the bridge, and he started driving really crazy, chasing the animal. And I prayed to God then that he didn't kill us. Well, we made it past the iron bridge. A mile down the road, I was yelling at him and begging him, please, to stop driving so fast. I looked at the tachometer, and I thought it was a speedometer, and it said 35. And I knew that we were going faster than that. And I begged him to slow down, and someone in the back seat said, oh, leave him alone, he's okay. And I turned and I looked and I said, are you crazy? He's driving like a maniac. And I heard, oh shit, famous last words. I turned around and all I saw was darkness and sparks. The '69 Fastback Mustang took out 100 feet of fence and flipped 3 times. I flew out of the passenger's door and I landed 60 feet from the vehicle. I had a coat on earlier that I had thrown over the back of the seat, and I was told that the coat flew with me and landed first side up, and I was lying perfectly in the middle of the coat, but my body was twisted. The coat saved my life, so I know there were some guardian angels that were taking care of me that night. When I lie there, I thought that I was going to die. And I called out, but maybe no one really heard me. And I said, help me. Somebody help me. But I didn't hear any response. And in the darkness, I heard a loud voice coming back to me. I said, nobody cares. And the voice said, first you have to care. Well, that meant a lot to me, and I'll never forget that. First, I have to care. And as you're dying, you do some talking to God, and you plead for your life. And I asked him to give me one more chance. It was very difficult to breathe, so I thought that this was it. Life was over, and I took my last breath, what I thought was my last breath, and I went unconscious. The ambulance came several hours later. It was way out in the middle of nowhere, so it took them a long time to get there, for them to even get help, and for them to even find me. They took me to one hospital, a local hospital, and in the local hospital, they really couldn't do anything for me. I don't have any conscious memory of this. And then they took me to Indianapolis, Indiana, to this Methodist hospital. My mother wanted to see me. She was waiting there for me. She's always been devoted, and she's been there for me. But the doctor said she couldn't see me until she stopped crying. So she stopped crying, and she told me that when she came in to see me, and she touched my face, and I told her that everything was going to be okay. My life changed in a split second, overnight. The first thing they did was shaved my long brown hair. They put screws in each side of my head, and they put a metal bar and a rope that was attached to weights, and this was traction. I was on a bed that was called a striker frame that turned you this way. It was hooked on each end, and it kept pressure from your body so that you wouldn't get sores. And this they did every hour. Sleeping was very difficult. I was diagnosed as a quadriplegic, C5 and 6 injuries, cervical and lumbar 5 and 6 injuries, which meant that I was paralyzed from the neck down. I couldn't feel, nor could I move. When I woke up in constant care, I remember opening my eyes, and I couldn't move my head, and I looked to the side of me, and I could see a woman in a bed next to me. She was 26 years old. She was in a coma for the rest of her life. I thank God then for my consciousness. And at this time, I realized that my last statement that I didn't need anybody, I suddenly realized that I needed everybody. And I told people that I didn't care that I couldn't hold my son anymore, but that I was just happy just to watch him grow up. 5 weeks later, I was lying in bed, and I had always heard that God wouldn't give you any more that you couldn't handle. And I told God this was too much. I couldn't handle anymore. And so one night, I worked really hard myself. If I have to care first, then I have to do the energy, and I have to try. So I worked and I worked till 4:30 in the morning to move my hands. I lay in a prenatal position with my hands on my chest, and I looked at my thumb, and I made my mind think of energy moving down through my arms into my hand. And my thumb, I yelled, "Move!" And it moved, a fraction of an inch, so small. But I was so elated. I had moved a mountain. And I yelled, and the nurses came in, and they saw what I had done. And then I said, if that one will work, the others will work. And so one by one, each one of my fingers moved a fraction of an inch. You can't imagine how hard it is to actually move a mountain. And I had moved 5 in one night. Well, everyone was pretty happy, and this gave me some hope. And I thought, if I had one hand, at least I could feed myself. At least I could blow my own nose. I could scratch myself. I could do so much if I just had one good arm. I had therapy for 4 months, and they really worked with me. I had wonderful nurses. I really feel that if you've ever had the privilege to know therapists and nurses, they are really angels on this planet. I left the hospital after 4 months, and even though I had filed for a divorce, they talked me into staying married to this man, and they sent me home with him. We lived in the country, so there wasn't really much professional care, and I developed complications. I developed a spastic hip hiker that caused me to go into scoliosis, and my body was becoming, turning sideways into an S position, and it caused me to have sores on sitting bones. And over a 9-month period, I had lost a lot of weight. I was down to 75 pounds, and I had 104 temperature for months and months, and I had blood poisoning. I was very sick. I had pretty much given up my will to live, and it didn't matter at this time whether I could use my arm or anything else in life. I'd just given up. The doctor that I had wouldn't take my case because he didn't know what to do with me. So a Dr. Babcock at the university medical clinic took my case and admitted me as an experimental patient. They did all kinds of crazy things to me. It's almost barbaric to me now. They put a Harrington rod in my back, and 2 years later they took it out. I was in full body casts from the chest down. They hooked me up to electricity once, an electrical procedure that was totally experimental. I had 12 needles down my spine, and they had hooked it up to electricity, and they turned on the juice, and it had killed the nerves from the inside. It took me a long time to recover from that. I couldn't even breathe. I felt that I had 9 years of dark ages. It took me that long to stabilize, for me to take control of my life and how to deal with my situation and how to overcome what I needed to do to figure out. Even going to the bathroom was a big deal and a major procedure. At 21 years old, I decided that the marriage really wasn't working, and I divorced my husband. And my son, who was 4 at the time, we thought that maybe we could try to work it on our own. It was really hard. I could barely take care of myself, alone him. And we really struggled for many years. I started to go to school. I knew that my education was the only way out of the situation for me. I at least was left with a bright mind, and I could speak, and I could at least use one hand, so I know that I could write papers. And we all know that's necessary. So I went to IUPUI, Indiana University and Purdue University. We called it Ooey Pooey. And I went there for 3 semesters, but the winters were really cold, and it was real hard for me. And at the time, I was in a manual wheelchair, and it was very difficult for me to get around. And I didn't have enough money to buy a car or a van. So my mother and my brother lived in Florida, so I decided to sell my house and move to Florida. And I bought a van, and that's just what I did. I went to St. Pete Junior College in Florida, in Clearwater. And I started reading. About positive thinking. I started reading about near-death experiences. I started reading about prophets and sages and philosophers and spiritual writings, different teachings around the world, and I wanted to find the common thread. I wanted to know what life was about and all the mysteries. You know, the Time Life books, the mysteries, I've read them all. I started teaching metaphysics to teenagers, thinking that I could give something back of what I had experienced. And I met a man in Missouri who was also teaching teenagers at the time. And 3 months later, we married, and I moved to California with him. He had 2 boys, and I had my son, and I thought that I had the family that I'd always dreamed of, and I was happy. I was learning to live the domestic life of family. I had 2 dogs, a spa. What more could I ask for? A garden, fresh vegetables, and we were always active. I learned to paint during this time and became an artist. I was very happy. I even taught Sunday school to 3rd and 4th graders. By this time I was teaching younger kids, and I really love that. I'm right at the level to where they can give me good hugs. I even did a 50-inch by 50-inch painting for the church in Santa Maria Unity Pyramid, and it's in the chapel there. It's a beautiful painting of a cosmic swirl with "Peace Be Still." One day, after 7 years of marriage, he asked me for a divorce. I was shocked, and I was sick and throwing up for 2 weeks, and for 7 months I cried. I moved out, and I moved into an apartment, my first apartment that was designed for handicapped people. It was great. I didn't know that there was so much luxury out there. And I met a man next door. His name was Art, and he had had a stroke 15 years earlier. And we became good friends. And we helped each other through a hard time. And he helped to encourage me and made me realize who I was and what I was about, and how my education was the most important thing in the world. And that sharing my story and helping others in the situation was part of my gift. Then I met a man, my current boyfriend, and I met him at a Christmas party, and he encouraged me to come to UCSB. I bought a brand new van, and I moved to Santa Barbara, and I'm attending UCSB. I'm an art studio major here, and I'm very happy. And I have a handicap apartment, and it's really nice. The things that I've learned through this adventure of mine and this path that I have chosen that was very difficult. The first thing that I learned was to forgive myself for what I thought were wrong decisions that I had made. In my youth, sometimes we don't always choose wise. But I learned to forgive myself. And then I learned to forgive others. And by forgiving others, it healed myself. I learned that there are angels out there, physical or non-physical, that are always there to help you no matter what the situation, the circumstance, whatever your need is. All you have to do is ask, and sometimes you don't even have to ask. I learned that you're more than your body. I think we all agree when Mitchell gave his talk a couple of weeks ago that he is definitely more than his body. He is a man of great character and spirit. I learned that we're all part of a whole. They're all part of the universe. No man is an island. I learned about the ripple effect. You know, when you throw a pebble into a pond and the ripples go out and it goes to the end and to the edges, and you think that the ripples just go and dissipate. They don't. They come back to the center. So I realized that send out good, send out positive, send out kindness, so that comes back. Whatever you send out into the world, you receive back. I learned about the cause and effect. There's a lot of cosmic universal principles. If we understand those laws and rules, then we'll be safe. I learned that there is a higher power and that you have, at any moment, the opportunity to call on that higher power, and you will have instant help. Instant help. I learned, above all, that your thoughts are the most powerful thing that you own. They are yours, and only yours. Guard your thoughts well, and use your words wisely, and your actions will follow your deeds. I learned that there's other dimensions and other realities. For a long time, I had to stay in one room when I was very sick for days and weeks and months. And I learned that the power of my mind, and I learned that there are other dimensions and other realities that we're not even aware of. And it's exciting. Sometimes school, I know, can be overwhelming and work, but I learned to take one thing at a time, one project at a time, to be patient with myself, to be patient with others. And don't wait until a tragedy happens before you take care of the responsibility that you need to take care of. I learned to be resourceful and don't depend on others, what I can do for myself, but to be gracious when others offer and to be accepting. I learned to love myself just as I am, even with my faults, and to learn to love others and not to be so judgmental, because no one knows another person's heart or their path or their past. I learned that there are miracles every day, every minute, every second that we're not even aware of. I've had an interesting life. How many of you can say that you've been on a helicopter ride to Santa Cruz Island, scuba diving, and I've done many other things. I learned that life is an adventure and it should be filled with fun and joy. And when we get depressed, and I often do, I look to things that give me joy. And I listen to good music. I listen to something that's uplifting. I'll read a good book, find a passage, talk to a friend. I'm not alone, even though I live alone. I learned to be respectful of life. Life is a gift, and it should be lived that way. I'm so thankful for technology. I'm waiting for the anti-gravity machine, and then you'll all want one. Don't take anything for granted, not even the air you breathe. There's an old saying that life is like climbing a mountain. You take one step at a time and climb to the top, for only on top can you see the whole view, what you've done and what you can do, and only there can you seek to see the visions of something new. I learned that laughter is a healing tool. You've heard the latest. They always say that grass is greener on the other side. Have you ever turned grass over? I learned about faith and hope and holding on to that. I learned about humility and compassion for your fellow man. I learned to be grateful and to be kind. And it doesn't take too much just to say a kind word to a person. The path that I have chosen has been a hard one, but if I could help one person through that path, then it was all worthwhile. Two years ago, my father passed away. He died of lung cancer, smoking cigarettes. And I was given a very special gift 3 days after that. My son, who was 22 at the time, the age of many of you, and his wife, who was 21, had a little girl. Her name is Ashley Ray, and she is the ray of sunshine in this grandmother's eyes. I'd like to close with a statement that my mother had said. She said, "Louanne, everybody has their wheelchair. Some are just more obvious than others. And I know that all of you have your stories. And I just want to thank you for letting me tell mine to you. Thank you."
Well, we thank you very, very much. I see our friend Mitchell's in the back of the room, and we want to welcome all the guests who are here. We have some time now for, if you want to ask Louanne some questions or make a comment, there's time for this. Okay?
Hey, Louanne, I was wondering, you said that you were looking at all these different philosophies and religious teachings and trying to find a common thread. Did you ever find that?
The common thread, yes, I did. Thank you, Colleen. There's a book called Embraced by Light by Betty Eadie. It's one of my favorites. And what I found, and what I know that she found also, it's a story about a near-death experience, is that the common thread to life is love. And this cosmic glue that it's kind of like, you know, ask your local physicist, the empty space that's within everything, there's more empty space than there are solid particles. And that empty space to me is love. And that empty space is Godness. It is the isness. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
I was wondering what happened to the other passengers in the car that night.
Okay, if you don't all hear the questions, I'll try to repeat them. What happened to the other passengers in the car that night?
I was the worst one that was injured. The other passengers, my girlfriend had broke her jaw and strained her back, but she was okay. The driver of the wreck, I think he got 3 stitches and had to spend a couple of hours in jail. And in those days, drinking and driving, they didn't do much to the offenders. So, and the other fellow who was in the wreck, I think maybe he broke his nose, so nothing really happened to them much. Any other questions?
I hope everybody wrote down the lessons that we got at the end of that very, very powerful, provocative talk. I mean, those are like jewels coming across, and there were so many of them. And Louanne, is this the first time you've done all of this? The first time you've reflected on lessons and meaning and in a public setting?
I've wanted to do this. I feel like my whole life is geared towards this direction because I have studied so much for myself and learned so much in life and took the hard path. It wasn't easy. And I wanted, it's almost like if I can share it, then it was worthwhile because there were some heavy lessons. And it made it all worthwhile in the long run.
Okay,
Thank you again.
Well, let me do one more thing though before.
Okay.
You have told us what you learned. Would there be anyone in the class today who'd be willing to reflect back what we learned today by hearing this testimony? Okay.
I think Louanne's a great mountain.
Pardon me? She's a great mountain climber.
Thank you.
Mitchell in the back.
Walter, I'm not in the class, but
Well, you're in the class. You're the class.
the lesson I came particularly to come and hear Louanne today, what a wonderful gift you are. I think the lesson that seems to be so important to me is that quote, which I may or may not have used last time, we cannot learn everything from experience. We don't live that long. We have to learn from other people's experience. And that's what this is all about, why you're in university, why we're in this class voluntarily again, as I mentioned last time. We came to learn from other people's experiences. What are you going to do with those lessons? That's what I carry away from the end.
You know, it's always such a great treat to have Mitchell here, and he brought the. Remember when Jennifer responded? He said she would get a prize. Here's the prize. Where's Jennifer?
Who knows Jennifer?
Well, Jennifer's here. We'll do this afterwards. Jennifer doesn't want to come walking up here right now, but Mitchell made good on the promise. You know, when I get to this kind of point and hear something that's so powerful, I don't want to dissect it and talk and think out loud. I just kind of like to find some quiet now to sort of let this really settle in. And I have a hunch that most of you feel that the same way. That this is not the time for any further analysis, because this is like hearing just the most powerful, poignant piece of music that just drives you right deep into the center of your own soul. That's how it affects me. And when I'm at that point, I don't like a lot of people talking to me. I'd like to reflect on it quietly. If that's your will, we have one more thing we need to do today. John, would you put the stuff up here so we can get more information? And as John is doing that, let's all of us thank Louanne so much for what she's done for us today.